Hello, my name is Robert Walker and this is the second episode in my series on managing insolvency in troubled times. What we're going to talk about today is the meaning of insolvency. Now, insolvency is the prelude to bankruptcy. Bankruptcy itself is not a difficult concept, it simply is the legal state you fall into if you're insolvent. The difficult notion is the notion of solvency or otherwise insolvency. Now, there's a whole act dedicated to personal bankruptcy called the Insolvency Act 2006, and it doesn't in actual fact define what solvency is or what insolvency is. The Companies Act of 1993 does define it, and we'll get to its definition at the end of this. We'll just work through what the various ideas of solvency might mean. Now then, the simplest way to see solvency is to consider it to mean that it's the ability to pay debts. So, what are the two elements within that expression? There is the debt, or in my preferred expression, the liability, which is an obligation to pay at a specific date. Ability to pay means you have access to money. There might be other things, but 99% of the time it would be the access to money. So, let's just think about what having access to money actually means. Now, I can identify four classes of things that might be sources of money. They are cash or equivalent, future earnings, asset realisations, or liability substitution. Now, quite clearly cash is best. If you've got balance at the bank, providing it's not money that you're holding on behalf of somebody else in trust, then that is the best source of the ability to pay, isn't it? The second I identified was future earnings. Now, that might seem a bit strange. You are going to marry up your ability to earn money in the future against an obligation that exists currently and say that you're solvent. Now, whilst that may sound strange, to anybody with a mortgage, they'll realise that that is in fact the main criterion used by banks to assess whether they should grant you a loan secured by a mortgage. They do consider the security of the property, the subject of the mortgage, but they're not all that keen on having to realise it, so it's definitely a secondary consideration. The main criterion, as I say, is future earnings, which sounds a bit strange. But anyway, there you have it. The important thing about it, future earnings, is that you must be able to ensure that you have the cash available from your job or profits from your business in cash at the time you have to meet the obligation. And that's what the bank, of course, is looking at, isn't it? It's saying that person will get their pay in the bank on the 20th of the month, and on the 21st of the month we will take the contribution they have to pay on that day to keep the loan current. So timing is everything in that case. No point having the cash after the liability has become due. And that's a very important point, isn't it? And that is what I will now add as a separate or an additional element into the expression ability to pay debts. And to be fair, the Insolvency Act does in a very technical context actually include that expression, because it talks about when a bankrupt is insolvent, and it says at a time when the bankrupt is unable to pay his or her due debts. Notice that's a subtle variation. The cash has to be there, or has to have the potential for the cash to be there to pay the liability when it arises. Notice you don't have to pay it, you just have to be able to have been able to pay it. Right, so now we will deal with the third class of event that gives rise to cash, and that is asset realisations. Now then, asset realisations may comprise two things: short-term assets and long-term assets. Accountants have those classes of event in mind when they are talking about what there's stock and trade, there's a short-term asset, might be liquid investment which gives you access to cash when you need it, that sort of thing. But also you might have long-term assets. So those long-term assets would be plant and equipment, or let's say if you're a carpenter, it's your tools of trade. If you have to sell your tools of trade to meet your liabilities, then you certainly cannot be relying on future earnings, because those tools will be critical to you to be able to earn the money. So these things might work in contradiction to one another. You have to be very careful about saying I have the ability by selling my tools, yet still pretending that you can rely on future earnings. The final one that I've identified as a source of cash is what I've called liability substitution. If you have a maturing liability today, but yesterday you could go to the bank and get an overdraft to be able to pay it, then that is a source of cash, and that means you had the ability to pay that liability. Right, okay, so that is the ability to pay debt, or a liquidity test, with a variation about timing. Now then, I'll now turn to a completely apparently different definition of insolvency, and I get this from my favourite piece of law, which is the National Bankruptcy Act of 1898, and it says this: a person shall be deemed insolvent within the provisions of this Act whenever the aggregate of his property, exclusive of any property which he may have conveyed, transferred, concealed, or removed with intent to defraud, hinder, or delay his creditors, shall not, at fair valuation, be sufficient in amounts to pay his debts. Now, there are 4 elements within that definition. There's property, or in my expression, assets. We will regard them as synonymous for this purpose. Then we have certain exclusions. Now, I won't go into those exclusions. It basically said you cannot take into account your assets if you've hidden them from your creditors. Then the third element of the definition is fair valuation, and the final one is debts or liabilities. In simple terms, to adapt Mr. McGawber, it is if your assets are less than your liabilities in value, result misery. If your assets are greater than your liabilities in value, result happiness. Now then, we'll rethink the notion of property or assets. Lawyers conceive of property being of 2 sorts: real property and personal property. Real property is land, basically. Personal property is a more complex idea, and it comprises several different subclasses. They will be tangible assets, financial assets, and intangible assets. We've already met the notion of tangible assets. They'd be the stock and trade, the supermarkets, what lines the supermarket shelves. It would be machinery, which we discussed might be a problematic asset, and there might be gold bars, might be bales of wool. Right? They're all tangible assets that you record on your balance sheet to show that they exceed the value of your liabilities. There are financial assets, there'd be shares, bonds, bank deposits in the main, though there would be all sorts of arcana that you would find in the capital markets, which may well be assets for this purpose. And then the third category was intangible assets. Now, they range from the clearly defined and distinct through to the distinctly elusive. At one end of that continuum of being clear-cut are things like patents. If you had a drug company patent, you'd be very rich indeed. Less distinct would be things like copyrights, brands, and the least distinct of all, and a very problematic asset is goodwill. And so you might be sitting there saying to yourself, could I include that on this balance sheet test that the National Bankruptcy Act envisages? And that is a difficult question, isn't it? So then we come to the third element of the definition, and that is the nature of fair value. So what does that mean? Well, in the mind of an economist, financial economist, it is the future cash that will be generated by that asset adjusted by complex mathematics to represent a sum expressed in today's terms. That's what fair value is. And if you found that confusing, make no mistake, it is. It's complicated. Now then, the fourth element of the definition, which by the way is sometimes called a balance sheet test, is the obligations, right? The debts, the liabilities in my word. And what are they? They again range from the very clear-cut through to the distinctly problematic. Things like obligations from contracts of supply or service, they're clear, right? Or generally clear. You've got these goods on a deferred basis and you will pay at a certain date. It has got an invoice, there is an invoice that describes the amount of money, that's the liability. Then other things of equal clarity are things like bank loans, you've got an overdraft, there's the number on the bank statement, that's your liability. Then you get, slightly less distinct would be statutory obligations that represent liabilities, taxation or rates. Now, sometimes taxation can be quite problematic to determine what is the value of the liability, and accountants play very serious tricks with that particular idea, which I won't go into. But so you can see that the capacity to calculate it becomes more complicated. The final class of event that is a liability is where it becomes very difficult, which is where there's a conditional element. So you have things like warranties, pensions, potential for having to pay redundancy, things that arise by operation of tort law, all sorts of things of that order. Right, so warranties might arise from contract. You sold some goods, and there's an express contract that says if it's faulty, we'll repair it. Or it might just arise by operation of law, the Consumer Guarantees Act. But you can see all of those things somehow need to be taken into account to satisfy that definition of balance sheet liability as contemplated by the National Bankruptcy Act of 1898. Now then, I will conclude this session by saying both of those two ideas of solvency are enmeshed or embedded in our Companies Act, and I will quote it. For the purposes of this Act, a company satisfies the solvency test if A. the company is able to pay its debts as they become due in the normal course of business. Notice that liquidity test there has the element of timing in it by the courtesy of the word due. And, in other words, both elements have to be satisfied. B, the value of the company's assets is greater than the value of its liabilities, including contingent liabilities. And that is, the contingent element is what I said before, there's a conditional element in the obligation. So, as I said, both, you have to satisfy both to be solvent under the Companies Act. Now, the distinction between these things might be more apparent and real, and we will deal with that at a later date. But notice that the National Bankruptcy Act of 1898 sounds across the ages and across the oceans, and it influences our law. Having said all of that, I'm talking about at the margins, aren't I? Most people know they're rudely solvent or they're rudely insolvent. It's when you're in the middle, somewhere in that grey area, that you need to understand all of these ideas. Thank you for listening. Now please, if you wish for written material, look below the video and you will find ways to acquire it. Thank you very much. Bye.